It started with thunder shaking the valley, rain pouring in wild sheets across Hollow Ridge. The riverbanks were swelling, and the drains hummed like they were alive. I was doing a routine check near the old quarry road when I heard it. A cry, not human, not even close. It was sharp, desperate, high-pitched. A kitten, trapped below in a storm drain already slick with rising water. I didn't know how deep it went, or how much time we had. All I knew was that it wasn't alone down there. And what happened next, I never expected. Not in 1,000 storms. The rain had been relentless for 3 days straight, thick, gray sheets slapping the pavement, pooling in every gutter, every dip in the road. By the time I got to the south end of Quarry Road, the lower trails were already flooded. I had my headlamp on, raincoat zipped to my chin, sloshing through ankle-deep mud when I heard the mewling again. It echoed, metallic and distant. I dropped to my knees near the old drain tunnel, one of those rusted-out pipes half buried in moss and gravel. That's when I saw her. Whimsy. She was barely the size of a water bottle, soaked to the bone, pressed against the far inner wall of the pipe. She couldn't move, either from fear or because she was injured. I called Mira on the walkie, told her to bring towels, gloves, and the thermal bag. We'd both done dozens of rescues before, but this one felt different. I reached out toward the drain, trying not to startle her, but she didn't even flinch. She just stared at me, eyes wide, shivering hard. Then something shifted in the shadows beside her. At first, I froze. My brain went straight to the worst. Another animal, territorial, maybe aggressive. But then I saw the movement clearly. A flash of striped gray fur. A raccoon. Not attacking, just watching. It didn't growl. It didn't move toward her. It stood guard. And somehow, in that instant, I realized I wasn't the only one trying to save that kitten. Mira arrived 10 minutes later, soaked and breathless, her boots slapping through the mud as she knelt beside me, peering into the drain with a flashlight clutched in one gloved hand. I didn't say anything at first. I just motioned for her to look, to really look. Her breath caught when she saw Whimsy curled like a trembling leaf against the mossy metal. But then her beam shifted, and the raccoon's shape emerged once more from the murk. He was hunched low but still, as if he'd taken on the role of reluctant sentinel, his body curled just enough to shield the kitten from the occasional splash of runoff water that gushed through the pipe like a vein full of storm-fed blood. We watched in silence, the rain continuing to whisper against the trees overhead, and it struck me how unnatural this entire moment felt. Not because of the danger, but because of the stillness between two species that would normally never trust each other. Mira whispered that we needed to move, that the water was rising fast, and Whimsy might not survive another hour. But every attempt to crawl closer sent her tiny frame into fresh spasms of panic. She'd scoot back deeper, closer to the raccoon, and instead of running or snapping, he would gently shift, offering her space behind him, like a shadow offering protection from the sun. We didn't know what to do, force the rescue and risk her bolting, or wait and trust that somehow the raccoon knew how to keep her calm. The sky had begun to darken into an early twilight, even though it wasn't yet 4. Storm clouds pressed low against the hills like swollen bruises, and thunder rumbled somewhere beyond the tree line, long and low, like a warning too tired to shout. Mira was on her stomach now, inching forward just enough to stretch a gloved hand toward Whimsy, murmuring soft encouragements as if trying to coax a child out from under a bed. I stayed back, watching the raccoon, who hadn't budged more than a breath since we'd arrived. But then, without sound or warning, he moved, not toward the kitten, but toward Mira's hand. Slow, intentional. And for one taut second, I thought we were about to get scratched or bitten, but no. The raccoon merely placed one paw directly on her glove and stared into her face. It was the kind of moment that made you question the rules of instinct and behavior, as if something ancient had passed between them in silence. Mira froze, and I could see in her eyes that she felt it too. This eerie recognition that we were no longer dealing with something wild in the usual sense. And then, as if signaling that it was time, the raccoon stepped aside, carefully, even gracefully, curling himself back into the shadows and leaving the path clear. Whimsy didn't move immediately, but her head lifted, and for the first time, she didn't shrink away when Mira reached forward again. That's when the sirens broke through the trees, faint, but getting closer. and we realized someone else had called for help. The flashing reds and blues bounced off the rain-slicked trunks like a heartbeat pulsing through the forest as Deputy Cole Banner stepped out of his truck, boots crunching over wet gravel. He didn't look thrilled. "You called in for backup, or are we chasing ghost stories now?" he asked, half joking but not really hiding his irritation. Mira stood, mud streaked across her knees and arms, cradling Whimsy against her chest like something sacred, the kitten barely making a sound now, just a weak pulse of breath beneath layers of towels. I motioned toward the tunnel, explaining everything. About the raccoon, about how he hadn't threatened, hadn't fled, hadn't acted like any wild creature we'd ever seen in a rescue. Banner's expression tightened. "You're telling me a raccoon babysat a kitten in a storm drain? That what I'm hearing?" Mira didn't argue. She just held out her arm, showing the damp print of the raccoon's paw still pressed faintly in the mud on her glove. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then quietly she said, "He waited until she was safe." Banner looked from the glove to the pipe, where the raccoon still lingered, just barely visible now, eyes glowing faintly in the beam of his flashlight like two small lanterns in the dark. No one tried to scare him off. Instead, the silence turned reverent. Because whether or not we understood what had happened, we all knew it hadn't been ordinary, and we weren't about to pretend it was. By the time we got Whimsy to the vet's office, the rain had turned cold and hard, the kind that bites through jackets and settles in your bones. Dr. Ramya Patel met us at the door, eyes sharp behind fogged glasses, already clearing a space on the exam table as Mira handed her the tiny, trembling bundle. I stayed back, too restless to sit, pacing near the window where the storm tapped a steady rhythm against the glass. Mira and I hadn't said much on the drive over. Every time I tried to talk about the raccoon, the words felt clumsy, like trying to explain a dream that slipped through your fingers the moment you woke up. Then my phone buzzed, a message from old man Elroy. I'd forgotten we'd given him updates from time to time, especially about rescues near the forest's edge. He'd lived out there longer than most people in town had been alive. The message was short, almost cryptic. "Ash saw the girl before you did. You owe him more than thanks." My stomach turned a little. Ash? Had he named the raccoon? I stared at the words, feeling the weight of something old and strange pressing into the edge of the moment. Back at the clinic, Dr. Patel frowned. Whimsy had signs of exposure, hypothermia, possible infection, but what worried her more was the small puncture wound near her ribs, not raccoon-made. Too sharp, too clean. Mira and I looked at each other, the same thought rising like a fog, but someone else had gotten to Whimsy before we did. That night, I couldn't sleep. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered in the wind, rattling the windows like a memory that wouldn't leave. I kept thinking about Whimsy curled up beneath the warming lamp in Dr. Patel's clinic, her tiny sides rising and falling like she was still caught in the rhythm of the rain. And I kept thinking about Ash, that wild, calm stare, the way he placed his paw on Mira's glove, the way he stepped aside only when it mattered most. Mira texted me around 2 in the morning. What if she's not meant for any of us? And I understood. We'd both felt it, that this rescue wasn't like the others. There was no clear victory here. We'd brought Whimsy in, yes, but it hadn't been us who earned her trust. Not really. A part of me wondered if we'd broken something sacred by intervening. Was it right to keep her now? Put her in a home, far from the forest and the strange creature who had guarded her through thunder and rising water? Could I separate the gratitude I felt from the ache of knowing she might have belonged somewhere else? 2 days later, Mira called me with a voice I hadn't heard in her before, tight, uncertain, shaken around the edges. She'd gone back to the storm drain alone, just to see. The pipe was empty, of course. No sign of Ash, but etched into the mud near the mouth of the drain, clear as daylight, were fresh boot prints, deep, deliberate, and far too large to be ours. Whoever it was had been standing there a while, and it hadn't been an accident. They'd been watching. We met up that evening, flashlight beams sweeping across the sodden grass and moss-covered stone, trying to piece it together. The puncture wound, the strange message from Elroy, the way Whimsy had trembled less with Ash than she did in any human arms, it all started to form a darker picture. Mira said it out loud first. What if she wasn't just lost? What if someone put her there? The idea made my stomach turn. Not just the cruelty of it, but the possibility that someone had used that storm, that drain, as a hiding place, or worse, a discard point. And what haunted me more was the thought that Ash hadn't just been protecting her from the elements. Maybe he'd been keeping her safe from whoever had left her there in the first place. We weren't rescuers anymore. We were witnesses. And somewhere out there, someone might know that. Whimsy stayed under observation at Dr. Patel's for 3 more days. Each time I visited, she'd inch a little closer to my hand, eyes still wide with caution, but now softened by something else, a flicker of recognition, a willingness to try. The wound near her ribs was healing well, though Patel still couldn't say for sure what caused it. Clean, she kept repeating, like a blade, not a bite. That single detail stayed in the air like smoke we couldn't wave away. Meanwhile, Mira was digging through old reports, cases of dumped litters, unexplained animal injuries, half-whispered rumors about underground rings that trafficked animals through the rural backroads surrounding Hollow Ridge. Most of it was circumstantial, speculative, but the pattern was there. A few kittens abandoned near storm pipes, others found with similar wounds, all within a 30-mile radius. All in places humans rarely wandered, except when they had something to hide. And yet, in the midst of this unraveling web, something else was blooming. I found myself thinking about Whimsy even when I wasn't near her, the weightless way she blinked, the tiny tremor in her whiskers when she dreamed. I'd started reading up on raccoon behavior too, trying to understand what could explain Ash's actions, but every source came up short. Raccoons were curious, yes, clever, but not known for gentle patience, especially not toward unrelated species. And yet Ash had waited, Ash had stayed. On the 4th day, when I reached into the enclosure, Whimsy didn't hesitate. She climbed into my hoodie, nestled against my chest, and stayed there as if it were the most natural place in the world. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that this wasn't over, that someone, somewhere, knew what Whimsy had survived. The tipping point came on a cold, violet-skied morning, just as the sun was crawling up behind the cedar hills. Mira had barely knocked twice before I opened the door. She didn't need to say anything. Her face carried everything. In her hands was a manila folder, thick with photocopies and blurry surveillance stills. She'd found something, or maybe something had found her. The local feed store had a busted security camera facing the back alley. Mira had asked them to pull footage from the night before the storm, and there it was, in grainy black and white, time-stamped at 2:13 a.m., a pickup truck idling beside the South Trail entrance. The driver never got out, but the passenger did. Hood up, body small and fast, cradling what looked like a box. They walked to the edge of the drainage ditch, knelt down, and left it there. 2 minutes later, the truck was gone. No plate number, no clear faces. But it was enough. Enough to know Whimsy hadn't gotten lost. She'd been placed, deliberately, in the one spot where nature might swallow the evidence. We sat in silence at my kitchen table while Whimsy played nearby, batting a cork with one fragile paw, unaware of the storm she'd survived and the storm still coming. Mira asked me if I still planned to keep her, to bring her into my home for good. And for the first time, I didn't know. Would doing so protect her, or paint a target on her again? That evening, as I carried her in my arms, I saw something glint from the edge of the tree line. 2 eyes, low to the ground, reflective and still. Ash, watching, waiting, just like before. And in that moment, I realized this decision wasn't just mine anymore. The confrontation didn't erupt like a storm. It crept in, quiet and cold. Mira sat across from me on the porch that evening, the air thick with wood smoke and the earthy scent of damp pine. Whimsy lay curled between us, her breathing steady, her small body finally starting to put on weight. Mira's hands were clasped around a mug she hadn't touched, her eyes trained on the trees. "I think you need to let her go," she said, softly, like the words were stones in her mouth. I didn't answer right away. I'd been thinking the same thing for days, but hearing it out loud cracked something open. It wasn't that I didn't want Whimsy. I did, more than I expected. She'd become part of the rhythm of my day, a pulse of gentleness in a world that had started to feel too sharp around the edges. But Mira was right. If someone had gone to such deliberate lengths to hide her, If they'd risked returning to the site in broad daylight to stand at the drain, they weren't done. They were looking for something, or someone. We debated options: an out-of-state shelter, a quiet foster far beyond Hollow Ridge, a back-channel rescue network that specialized in quiet adoptions. But each suggestion felt like surrender, like handing over a story we still didn't understand. And beneath it all, I couldn't shake the feeling that if we separated Whimsy from this place, from the woods, from Ash, we'd be unraveling something sacred. And yet, Mira's voice stayed with me. If you keep her, you might be forcing her into a story that was never meant to be yours. The next morning, I packed a small bag. If we were going to decide Whimsy's future, we'd have to return to where it began. We returned to Quarry Road under a slate sky, the air dense with the scent of earth and moss, and something older that lingered deep in the bark of the trees. I held Whimsy close as we walked the narrow trail toward the storm drain, now dry but stained with the memory of floodwater. The same rocks, the same twisted tree roots and rusted pipe, but it didn't feel the same. It felt like the mouth of something watching. Mira walked ahead, scanning the brush line, while I stood still at the drain, kneeling down so Whimsy could peer into the hollow. Her ears twitched. No fear, just awareness. She knew this place, and I know, she knew he was near. Ash appeared without sound, emerging from the brush with that same slow, deliberate posture. His fur was damp, glinting faintly, and his eyes locked onto mine with something unsettlingly direct. He stepped closer than he ever had before, no longer hiding, no longer guarding from a distance. He stopped just a few feet away, and for the first time, Whimsy made the move. She stretched out of my arms, paws out, body trembling with a strange urgency, not fear, not distress, but recognition. I froze. Mira said nothing. Neither of us knew what the right move was anymore. Keep her? Give her over? Was that even what this moment was? Ash didn't growl, didn't touch her. He just stood there, waiting. And suddenly I realized this wasn't about claiming her. It never had been. It was about asking permission. And in that aching pause, with storm clouds coiling once more in the distance, it became clear. The next choice would belong not to us, but to Whimsy herself. Whimsy stood at the edge of my arms, her tiny body half lifted, half suspended between me and the forest floor. Her eyes locked onto Ash's. No hesitation, no searching. And in that still, breathless second, she leapt. Not far, just enough. Enough to land softly between us, close to Ash, but not touching. Her ears flicked, her body remained low, but there was no panic in her movements, only quiet intention. She glanced back once, not at the woods, at me. And in that look, I didn't see fear, I didn't see confusion. I saw trust, not the kind that clings, but the kind that releases. The kind that says, you brought me this far, and now I'll take it from here. Ash didn't react with affection. He didn't curl around her or lead her deeper into the forest like some storybook guardian. He simply stayed beside her, alert, still, eyes flicking between us and the trees as if weighing what came next. Mira whispered, barely loud enough to catch the wind, "She's choosing." I wanted to call her back. My arms ached with it, but something deeper held me still. Love, maybe, or something close enough, the kind that puts the soul above the self. She didn't disappear into the woods that day, not fully. She stayed at the edge for a while, returning in the mornings, vanishing by night. Sometimes with Ash, sometimes alone, never lost, never caged. And I learned that rescue doesn't always mean reclaiming. Sometimes it means bearing witness. Sometimes it means letting go. Weeks passed, the rains came and went, and Hollow Ridge slid back into its quiet rhythm. Mira and I kept visiting the edge of the woods, not to check or interfere, just to be present, just in case. Whimsy appeared less often, her visits growing more sporadic but never fully stopping. Each time, she looked stronger, more sure of herself, a creature shaped by two worlds but owned by neither. Ash remained a shadow, sometimes glimpsed, sometimes not. Old Man Elroy said he'd seen him by the river again, standing watch beside a fox kit with a broken leg. I didn't question it anymore. Some things belong to stories older than ours. Some instincts don't follow rules. I'd kept the small towel from that night, the one Whimsy was wrapped in after Mira pulled her from the drain. Sometimes I'd find leaves on it by morning, as if placed with purpose. Sometimes not. It didn't matter. What mattered was the knowing that we'd been part of something rare, something threaded with more than luck or accident. Something that challenged what we thought we understood about rescue, survival, and the bonds we form when language falls away. So if you're watching this, wondering where the line is between helping and holding on too tightly, remember whimsy. Remember ash. Remember that sometimes the most powerful thing we can offer isn't shelter, it's freedom. If this story moved you, share it. Reflect on your own instincts, and maybe, just maybe, leave a little space for the wild to show you what it knows.